Hi, this is DoNotCiv. This video is going to be titled Techno Cornucopians, or Really Smart Dumb People. Now, I haven't made a video in, I think, a few weeks, so I could be a little rusty here. Vlogging is really a perishable skill. You've got to put out vlogs every 2-3 days just to stay on top of your game, and if you don't do that, you really fall out of the groove rather quickly, is what I've found. You're not putting out videos just to satisfy your own ego or, satisfy your need for self-expression, although I'm sure some people do it for that reason. It really is just to stay in the groove. Like I said, just stay on top of your game. So I haven't done that, so this could be a little halting at points, could be a little unfocused. That's just the way it is. So what I'm going to do is read along with an article posted by Chris Martinson on Zero Hedge, May 9th, 2012. It's called Mining for Minerals on Asteroids, or Why Cornucopians in Space Deliver a Dangerously Misguided Message. Chris references a couple of YouTube videos, well, maybe more than a couple, a few. The one that I took the time to watch in advance was by Peter Diamandis, and it concerned abundance. I will put a link to that video as well as the Zero Hedge article. It's called his talk, Abundance is Our Future. I'll put a link to that talk, and I'll put a link to Martinson's article. And Martinson's article contains all the hyperlinks to the other videos, so you just need to pull that up if you want to reference some of the other videos. Okay, hopefully it'll be clear when I interject. Hopefully it'll be clear when it's me talking versus Chris Martinson. So what I'll do is I'll say, I think it'll be clear when I just, there'll be a pause, and then I'll interject some points, and then I'll say continuing when I begin to pick up with his article. So I don't want my thoughts to get confused with his thoughts, but this is going to be sort of a dual-pronged attack on these techno cornucopians. One more thing before I get started. I do think Chris is just right on the money here. I think he hit the nail right on the head. And as I was listening or watching this TED Talk by Peter Diamandis, I mean, it was really irritating to me. I could just, I was subconsciously grinding the enamel off my molars because I just thought, this guy is getting more and more into fantasy land with each passing moment. But let me stop here. There's plenty of time to get into that as I read through Chris's article. This, I think, is going to run about an hour. It would probably take me 30 minutes to read through Chris's article, and then with my interjections, some total will run somewhere around an hour's length, just so you know. All right. So, one other thing before I get started. It probably would be helpful if you paused here and watched the TED Talk by Peter Diamandis before we get into the nuts and bolts of the criticism. I think that would be helpful. I did that. I watched it in full. So it's your choice. Either pause here and listen to it, or just follow along as I go through this article. All right, starting. Cornucopians in Space Deliver a Dangerously Misguided Message by Chris Martinson. Once a year, the very chic and exclusive TED Conference takes place in Southern California, bringing together entrepreneurs, inventors, and thought leaders from every corner of the world. There, gathered around a stage, a kind of hive mind begins to unfold, in which the most cutting-edge ideas in healthcare, energy, social development, and behavioral psychology are shared from a very plugged-in, big-screen podium. It's extremely well done, and I would concur with that. This is me talking. I think the production values on these TED Talks are quite high. I don't always agree with the content. In fact, I often disagree. Continuing. And despite the reflexive criticism from outside the conference, I wasn't aware that there was reflexive criticism, but I guess there is, that the gathering is inward-looking and elitist, TED usually does manage to disturb the zeitgeist a little with its unveilings in technology and innovation. It is good. plainly so, that next step advances in solar technology, data collection, and developing World Health initiatives are explained and broadcasted from TED, especially given that policymakers or those who have the ear of policymakers are also often in attendance. A better charge to level against the TED conference, however, is that it's routinely, if not unfailingly, optimistic. Okay, I'm going to stop here. Couldn't agree more. This is one of my biggest gripes and my biggest pet peeves for when it comes to watching these TED videos. They're far too optimistic, far too into touting and being boosters for technology that hasn't even been invented yet, let alone proven. Now, if you watch Peter Diamandis, if you watched his TED Talk, as I recommended prior to listening to me read through Chris's article, then you heard him mention at several points in the talk future technologies. At one point he was talking about 3D printing. Now that's got to be one of the most fringe, Star Trek-y, yet to be invented, almost barely even conceptualized futuristic technologies on which to hang one's hat. And that's just one example of where I tend to take strong exception to these Techno Cornucopianists like Diamandis, as they routinely hang their hat on things like photovoltaic paints and, in this case, 3D printing. As who's that other guy, Peter Joseph, who's made the various Zeitgeist movies. He's the same, and equally annoying. Okay, continuing. The 2009 conference held in the aftermath of the global financial crisis did not address the unpleasantness of that historic event in any meaningful way. Moreover, very few talks in recent years have addressed energy costs, and especially the price revolution in oil. In some sense, TED is the techno-innovators' version of the faith expressed by neoliberal economics, people like Paul Krugman, that's me interjecting here, for example. Continuing, in which the market solves nearly all of its own problems. The enduring posture at TED, therefore, is one that acknowledges serious world problems, ranging from war to famine, water and food availability, but which nearly always concludes that amazing and ingenious people, can you detect the sarcasm there? Amazing and ingenious people, geniuses, are working to solve the problem. The great man theory of history would find each TED conference a comfortable place to be. I think the sarcasm, the slightly hidden sarcasm there is justifiable and warranted. Okay, continuing. So it was perhaps surprising, but also encouraging, that the January 2012 TED conference finally addressed the subject of collapse by inviting Paul Gilding to give his talk, "The Earth is Full." Okay, the link to that is in Chris's article. Now, I actually put that in my favorites list. For those of you who follow my video, you subscribe to me, then you see my videos in favorites. I know I favorited that video. I watched it at least twice. I watched at least two versions of it. One at a TED Talk, at the official TED Talk, and one at a TEDx talk that was given somewhere in the Midwest. And I know I favorited one of those talks. So I've seen that talk by Paul Gilding, and I thought it was spot on. He nailed every point. And yeah, I guess I am also surprised. I didn't realize that it was the keynote talk for the January 2012 TED conference, but glad to hear it. Continuing. I'd actually seen a version of Gilding's talk at the Ilhahi lecture series here in Portland last fall. Gilding's view is that we've reached a relationship between global population and available natural resources that makes it inevitable that the economy, a converter of natural resources into goods, will sharply slow down, if it has not started to slow down already. Gilding can be thought of not as a neo-Malthusian or a doomer, but rather as an ecological economist. paren. As most readers know, I share the same view, close paren, and as do I. I'm a card-carrying Malthusian myself. Not a neo, but a strict Malthusian. Continuing. Gilding looks at trailing historical growth rates, again, the rate at which natural resources are converted to industrial and population growth, and concludes that the future size of the economy at these growth rates would create a machine that the Earth simply cannot sustain. Again, I agree. That's Chris talking, and I'll just concur. Again, I agree as well. Continuing. But Gilding's TED Talk was countered, if you will, with a more typical and rousing plea from Peter Diamandis of the X Prize Foundation. Now, the X Prize is heavily invested in space travel and promoting startup ventures to take people into outer space. For what purpose? I don't know. I don't know. I mean, if you listen to renowned physicists like, who's that guy at Princeton, Freeman Dyson. If you listen to Freeman Dyson, I mean, he was on the committees that determined, he was on at least one of these committees convened by NASA that would determine, what were valuable and justifiable experiments to perform on the International Space Station, and they had dozens of candidates. And in the end, what they found out, what they concluded, the committee concluded, was that about the only experiment that warranted any science time or budget whatsoever was the effect on the effect of a weightless environment on space station crews, for which you have to admit you do need a space station. Other than that, they concluded that the value of space flight, especially low Earth orbit space flight, was basically nil. It offered nothing in return. So that's just my extemporaneous interjection there. Anyways, that's Peter Diamandis. He has this X Prize Foundation. Should I? Yeah, I guess I'll look a little into his bio. I mean, the guy's got a lot of achievements. He's got more awards than I'll ever get in my lifetime, probably in 10 lifetimes. I mean, he's just got more awards than you can shake a stick at. I guess maybe I'll put a link to his wiki page. Notable achievements: co-founder, chairman of the Singularity University. Oh yeah, this guy, he's big into the whole, Kurzweilian singularity. Maybe we'll get into that in a second. Served as CEO of Blastoff Corporation. A lot of these space ventures. I don't know if I want to read through all these. There's like 20 bullet points here. I'm not going to read through all of them. You can go see for yourself. But anyway, he's a space nut. Okay, he's big into this, space as a promising future for humanity. Whatever. Let's get back to Chris's article here. Continuing, Diamandis, grounded heavily by a personal background in science and medicine. Yeah, he has an MD. Where's his MD from? Not sure that it's relevant here. Probably shouldn't have stopped here just to go find out where he graduated from. Oh shoot. Well, now that I've taken this long, I might as well find it. Come on. I think it's Harvard. Oh, education. Here it is. Undergraduate and graduate degrees in aerospace, engineering and health, sciences and technology from MIT. Brother of Theta Deuteron, charge of Theta Delta Chi. MD from Harvard Medical School. Okay, so there's his bona fides and curriculum vitae for those of you who are interested. Let's get back to Chris's article. His talk, Abundance is Our Future, which I recommended that you should have watched, was a laundry list of fast-moving technological innovations that have transformed poverty rates historically and which promise to transform quality of life in the years ahead. one of the most laudable and humanistic beliefs advanced by Diamandis is that the 3 billion people remaining to come online to the internet and telecom networks represents a vast and underutilized supply of human thinking. Okay, it's really, when I hear horseshit like that, it is really not, I'm not talking about Chris. Chris is accurately representing this guy's worldview. It drives me to distraction. It just drives me crazy when I hear people talking about that. Well, I gotta quote Chris here. Wait, let me finish with Chris's thought, then I'll give my thought. As a previous educator myself, I find this argument to be powerful. I'm surprised to hear Chris Martenson say that. I couldn't disagree more with this statement. The result of putting another 3 billion people on this planet, and according to UN forecasts and projections, that will be achieved by 2050. As I've said in previous videos, I highly doubt it. I think you try to put another 3 billion people on this planet, you're going to have 5 billion people die of starvation, disease, squalor, and other forms of unhappy denouements to their existence. I just think that's crazy. And this article, that the reason to put another 3 billion people on this planet is because of the potential of what they have to offer. That among those 3 billion, there's going to be another Einstein, there's going to be another Jonas Salk, there's going to be another Isaac Newton, there's going to be another, a group of inventors and scientists and techno theorists who are going to solve all our problems for us. That, to me, is wishful thinking at its worst. As we know, only a small part of society ever contributes anything to society. The vast bulk of us are just consumers, right? We don't know anything. We don't know how to make a light bulb. We don't know how to make a plasma screen television. We don't know how to make an iPod. We don't know how to make a vaccine. We don't know how to make anything, right? Most people. It's only a very small percentage of these highly talented, highly creative, highly educated scientists and engineers who ever produce anything that make our lives better. So of that, you're saying we've got to put 3 billion more people on the planet so that we can not deny ourselves of the potentiality of, missing out on the next Einstein from Bangladesh, or the next the next great scientist or great engineer from Zimbabwe. Well, I'm sorry to say it, but these third world countries, which is where most of the population growth is happening, a lot of it in sub-Saharan Africa, these are not the people who are going to build you the next version of the Hubble telescope. These are going to be people who are by and large suffering. They're by and large hungry, and they're by and large just burning wood to cook their food to survive. 2 billion people in the world today use wood as a fuel source. Okay? Adding another 3 billion ain't going to solve our problem. It's going to make the problem worse. So I think that's an argument that I bristle at the most. And I hear people, these insufferable Pollyannas, saying that, we need to put more people on the earth and that will add to the quality of life. No, it won't. No, it won't. It will create more misery. It will create more squalor. It will create more poverty. It will create more suffering. It will create more painful, needless, wasteful deaths on this planet. But you go ahead, and if you want to believe that, believe it. The whole point of this video is to try to disabuse you of that notion. We'll see if I'm able to carry the day here with my counter arguments. Okay, Chris says he finds this argument to be powerful. Sorry, I can't disagree with that more. Okay, continuing. My quibble, his quibble, with Diamandis And his talk is that the magnitude of the world's present challenges cannot wait for the array of potential solutions that may, emphasis his, may start to work at the margins of humanity, even despite his core belief that innovation and its impacts will actually start to speed up. Okay, I'm going to stop here. This, if you listen to, maybe I'll put a link to this, listen to the Peter Joseph interview, the podcast with Joe Rogan. Boy, will that give you some insight into the whole Zeitgeist movement. It's a little over 2 hours long. I listened to the whole thing, as well as I watched all 3 Zeitgeist movies and took part in a lot of online discussions. So altogether, I've probably got 20, 30 hours invested in examining this Zeitgeist movement and its twin sister movement, the Venus Project, which is led by Jacques Fresco. And all these guys are dream weavers. They're all techno fantasists. They're all cornucopianists. Okay? They're all living in a la-la land of Star Trek-y, unproven, uninvented, barely conceptualized even, except at the science fiction level, technology. You'll hear guys like Peter Joseph and this guy Diamandis talking about photovoltaic paints are going to supply all their energy needs. Really? Yeah. Let's see you run a D11 Caterpillar or fly a 787 Dreamliner on photovoltaic paints. I want to see that. I want to see you do that. Or that we'll have 3D printers. You ever heard this 3D printer nonsense? The idea that, hey, I need a crescent wrench. Well, I'll just, punch it into my computer, and the 3D printer which is hooked to my computer will just print me out one, right, with nanoparticles or whatever. I mean, this is just, now maybe one day in the year 95 we might have such a technology, but there is nothing even remotely on the horizon for the next several decades, if not hundreds of years, that will even come close to that. And yes, I have seen 3D printers. I used to go to trade shows all the time. I've seen them at the Orange County. I've seen the Roland 3D printer at the Orange County CAD convention. I've seen them, okay? And they use polymers and lasers to 3D print. Well, okay, polymers and lasers is a lot different than using stainless steel, right, to make a socket wrench. So it's dreamland. These people are just in fantasy, unicorny dreamland. There's just no other way to put it. So let me see, where did I leave off here? Okay, I'm continuing with Martinson. After all, Diamandis is an adherent to technological singularity. I think I mentioned that. The notion that exponential growth in technology will eventually reach a crescendo, thus offering humankind super solutions at a kind of hyperspeed rate of change. By the way, I don't agree with this view, and I fully concur with Chris on this. I don't agree with it either. In fact, I find it ridiculous. Continuing. Diamandis would go on to further test my ability to follow his arguments, however, when he recently announced a team that will explore the possibility of mineral mining on moving asteroids. I have no doubt the public has reacted to this prospect as either impossible or as another silly story, yes, about the grandiose dreams of tech millionaires. Yes, this is what I mean about really smart, dumb people. These are people who say, oh wait, let me read this next paragraph from Martinson, which is exactly what I was just going to say. Continuing. I had a different reaction, why, and this is boldface, why is Diamandis thinking about mineral mining in space when resources here on Earth, in his view, are so abundant? ? Bingo. Bingo. All these guys who subscribe to the infinite Earth, the abundant Earth theory, abiotic oil, all the other horse shit that you hear from these people, and a lot of the horse shit comes from this these techno-triumphalists, these cornucopianists in the high-tech community. It's funny, you don't often hear engineers spout this bullshit. You don't often hear this from civil engineers or mechanical engineers or electrical engineers or physicists or geologists or petroleum reservoir engineers. It's funny, you don't hear this from them. At least I haven't. Where does this primarily come from? Primarily from the techies, the high-tech community, in particular Silicon Valley, Oracle, Google, Adobe, North Bay, Autodesk, Seattle, Microsoft, although maybe not as much Microsoft, but definitely Bay Area. These Bay Area techno-triumphalists love to talk about this stuff. They love to go off into fantasy land. That's just a personal observation, just an anecdotal observation. And not surprisingly, the maturity level at these companies, it's like you see 20, 30, and 40-year-olds dragging their adolescence. They're like dragging their precocious adolescence well into their middle age. It's as though, dealing with people in these companies, it's as though they never grew up. They never, became fully functioning, thinking adults that can face off against hard reality. They love this science fiction-y, dweeby, wonky, cover, photoshopped, beautifully photoshopped artwork of how the future is going to be suitable for framing on the cover of Popular Mechanics or Popular Science. But reality, no. Reality, no. Right? Some of them are smart enough. Well, I don't know. I'm getting too deep into this. I probably should continue. Yeah, that's a good idea. Let me just continue reading through. Although here in America we tend to dumb down complex projects into simple either-or arguments, it was useful to hear the Gilding versus Diamandis debate at TED. In addition to their respective presentations, they had an on-stage exchange, which you can see here, hosted by Chris Anderson. Excuse me, I'm going to take a sip of water here. I didn't watch that exchange. I should probably go back and do that. Continuing, one of the major default lines between cornucopian technologists like Diamandis and thinkers like Gilding is the role that technology plays in the creation and extraction of resources. In ecological economics, technology helps us extract resources, but for folks like Diamandis, technology creates resources. It is both, technology creates resources, right? So if we have powerful enough supercomputers, that somehow is going to solve the problem of peak oil, right? We'll have unlimited oil extraction across the planet. It's just a matter of having the right software and hardware. That's what that means. Technology, boldface, creates resources. That's really what that means. And there are, lots of really smart, dumb people out there who believe that. The techno-hyper theorists, techno-hyper-triumphalists, like this guy, Diamandis, and like Kurzweil. Okay, continuing. It is both a distinction without a difference, and also a distinction with a huge difference, depending on your perspective. Well, I go with the latter, a distinction with a huge difference. Continuing. And the implications, depending on that difference, for the future price path of commodities, for inflation, for industrial growth, are enormous. Yeah, they are enormous, and shortly following enormous, I would say catastrophic and apocalyptic. Continuing, ask yourself the following. For the technologies which allowed for the increased rate of extraction of coal in the 19th century, or which now allow for the increased rate of extraction of natural gas from shale in the 21st century, did those technologies create the resources or merely extract them as they already existed? ? Rhetorical question. I think the audience can answer that for themselves. Continuing, the answer seems rather obvious, doesn't it? I mean, I want to be sympathetic to the view that technology creates resources. I don't know why you want to be sympathetic to that view, Chris. There was nothing in it for you or anyone else. It's a stupid view. Continuing, in the sense that technology makes previous unrecognized or unrecoverable resources available. Okay. All right, I'll grant you that. Yeah, I mean, you know, just like, I mean, there was a New York Times article on this a few years ago about what Chevron and Shell are doing down in the Kern County fields. You know, they're using fracking, in this case not for gas, but they're fracking and then they're using steam injection. And yeah, they do get a brief spike in the production curves, but all they do is drain the fields faster. I know Chris knows that, and so should most of you. But it doesn't create more oil, right? It just drains the field faster, as I said. Same thing's going on now in Saudi Arabia, right? The water cut is steadily increasing on all the big fields out there. The water cut on Ghawar is increasing, okay? So they're having to pump more and more water to get more oil. And, you know, the promises that they've made to OPEC and the international community, I think they said they could hit 12 million barrels a day, or maybe they, you know, it's a real stretch for them to meet that level of production, because you risk, when you have too much water cut, you risk actually damaging the field, permanently damaging it. So it's a real threat. Anyway, continuing. But a threshold I cannot cross, however, is the idea that there are always new resources waiting to be discovered. Couldn't agree more. If we can only create a technology to obtain them. Yeah, so here we're in complete agreement on that point. And there's far too much of this wishful, techno-fantastical thinking going on in, again, this is coming, I don't hear this kind of nonsense coming from geophysicists and petroleum engineers. You primarily hear it coming out of the futurist community, right? The transhumanist community, the Illuminati, if you want to put it that way, of the computer science and IT community. That's where you primarily hear these ideas coming from, that we can solve everything through technology. Okay, continuing. Which brings us back to mining for minerals on asteroids. Now, I'm just going to stop here. You know, when I first saw the movie Alien, which was directed by Ridley Scott, I thought that was one of the coolest movies. Still do, actually. It still holds up, that I ever saw. This mining ship, this giant mining ship, Nostromo, that would go out into deep space and, you know, mine for minerals and then bring it back to the Earth or other planets. I just thought I was intrigued by that concept. And there was lots of follow-up movies and sitcoms. There was a very famous British sci-fi comedy called Red Dwarf that took off on that, and it was quite good, really intelligent sci-fi comedy. But I think they named their ship the Jupiter mining ship or something like that. But yeah, I used to be one of these guys, I guess is what I'm saying. I used to be one of these fantasists, one of these techno dream world guys, sci-fi dream world guys who used to think, yeah, that's a possibility. We might be able to do that in the future. And it was only around 2005 when I started learning about peak oil. I started learning about things like the Pacific garbage patch, and that overpopulation wasn't real, and that there was serious, dramatic cliff points for, you know, peak everything, including things like rare earth minerals, that we were running out of rare earths at an alarming rate, that the world's aquifers are drying up, pollution. You know, you've heard me talk about this in videos plenty of times, etc., etc., etc. So up until about 2005, I was one of these, you know, techno dweeby guys who thought you could run the world, you know, by moving pixels around with a mouse, you know, or inventing bigger and better hardware, engineering bigger and better hardware, and writing better algorithms. You know, I thought that there was a promising future in that. I don't anymore. At least I'm highly, highly skeptical. So that pendulum for me has swung, you know, all the way, almost all the way to the other side. You know, if one is the Kurzweil is where Kurzweil drives his stake, and Diamandis drives his stake of, you know, a promising future of superabundance for all mankind, and you know, we can put billions more on the planet. If that's a 1, and 10 is ultimate pessimism, humanity's headed for inevitable collapse, if we haven't already gone over the cliff, then I'm probably at an 8 or even a 9 on that scale, you know, just so you know. Not quite at a perfect 10. I'm not quite the ultimate doomer, but I'm pretty close. Okay, so continuing with Martinson's article here, why is, okay, and he just, I'm just going to back up a bit, which brings us back to mining for minerals on asteroids. Why is Diamandis not pursuing technologies for material upgrading, for example? In material upgrading, the task is to substitute materials once thought inapplicable, for example, to the task of solar manufacturing or electricity transmission. Let me just stop here. Now, some of this techno upgrading is happening. You know, I want to give a little credit to the other side. You know, there are various thin film technologies now that are being used for solar panels, wraparound solar panels. They're not all the rigid, you know, box type, meter square box type that produce about 200 watts that we're used to seeing. So there is some innovation going on there. There are some substitution technologies that are going on, substitute material engineering that's going on with these solar panels, where they're using the, you know, the less rare of the rare earth minerals to make them. So I do want to, you know, acknowledge that some of that is going on. But continuing with what Martinson is saying here, if copper gets too expensive to use for electrical transmission, then some other metal or combination of metals or even liquids or gases are used. That's the theory anyways. Let me just stop here. Did you know in World War II, in order to make the atomic bomb, and I forget if this was, I think this was the process used to create uranium. They had 2 processes. One was at Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and I think that was the calutron that they used to make uranium, and then there was the, I forget that name on that facility on the Columbia River, and I think that's where they made plutonium. But anyways, this was during the war, and copper was in very short supply. It was in like no supply. You couldn't get copper to save your life. In fact, they had regular donation drives from the general public asking them to turn in their copper pots and kettles and pipes, and that was melted down to make bullets. So there was almost no copper available. So to make the magnetic coils of these calutrons, you know what they ended up using? Silver. Can you believe that? As a substitute material. I mean, you think of silver as being pretty expensive, but it was actually more economic, more feasible to create the electrical wiring using silver than copper. So that's just a little anecdote I thought I'd throw in there in case you weren't aware of that. As an example, sort of an ironic, unintuitive substitute material engineering that has, you know, that's happened in the past. Okay, so continuing, why mount energy-intensive missions into space and run heavy payloads back to Earth? Question mark. Hallelujah, Chris. Exactly the point. Surely the ROI, return on investment, to such efforts would be low. Yeah, that's putting it mildly. Even if the minerals involved commanded a very high price, ... back on Earth. Yeah, excellent point. Couldn't agree more. I mean, come on, folks. Let's get real here. I mean, imagine the cost of building these ships, putting them in orbit, sending them to far-off destinations, even if it's within our own solar system. Mining these materials, getting them back on the ships, and then getting them transported back to Earth. I mean, just the cost of bringing a few moon rocks back from the moon was, no pun intended, astronomical. All right? Can you imagine the cost of bringing all ore, raw, unprocessed ore back to Earth, or even if it's processed? No. The cost would be just completely unthinkable, beyond the pale. Continuing, I think I have one answer to this question, but first let's review the business plan, the mission of Planetary Resources, Inc. from the Los Angeles Times. Now, I'm not sure, is Planetary Resources, Inc., is that one of Diamandis's ventures? Let me see if I can, bear with me here. Planetary Resources. All right, let me just do a quick search. Sorry about this. Just bear with me a second. Yes. Okay, found it. This guy's got so many bullet points for his corporations that he's found it's hard to find. Okay, Diamandis co-founded Planetary Resources, Inc. in April 2012 with Eric Anderson, an organization dedicated to mining asteroids. Oh, too funny. Let me continue to tell you some of the other people involved in this venture. Billionaire investors include Google's Eric E. Schmidt and Larry Page, as well as Ross Perot Jr., Charles Simonyi, and others. Advisors include filmmaker explorer James Cameron, also of Alien fame, Alien 2, and several renowned scientists. Okay, that's just background. Okay, so continuing here, we're going to read from this group's mission statement of Planetary Resources, Inc. Here we go. A group of 21st century private space entrepreneurs is expected to unveil an ambitious new venture to mine the surface of near-Earth asteroids in search of precious metals and rare metallic elements. The plan may seem like it was torn from a science fiction novel, and critics say the idea may be far-fetched. You think? And difficult for a small company to accomplish. But the company, Planetary Resources, Inc., has already drawn an A-list of investors and advisors. The backers include, I've already named some of these people, so I'm going to skip them. Humanity has been driven for thousands of years to explore the Earth for resources, said Peter H. Diamandis, the company's co-founder and co-chairman. Quote, the next step is to expand the economic sphere of humanity beyond Earth's confines. Well, as Ronald Reagan used to say, you're not going to do that, Peter, on dead plants. You're not going to do that on foraminifera juice, you know. That's kind of, most of you guys probably don't know this. Oil doesn't come from dinosaurs. It comes from plankton and marine organisms. So that was just a very dweeby tip of the hat to the petroleum geologists out there. Foraminifera, those are the tiny little marine organisms that they fall to the bottom of the sea and, you know, cook for millions of years, and that's where oil comes from primarily. Okay, so you're not going to explore the stars, or you're not going to explore the solar system, let alone the stars, on dead plants and dead marine organism leftovers. Okay, it's just not happening. You're going to need some new fuel source. And if you listen to this talk, if you've listened to the talk by Peter Diamandis, then you know the total number of times he mentioned peak oil or fossil fuels was, drumroll, 0. Now, how can you talk about going off to mine asteroids and not talk about the energy source for these craft? Not even mention it in passing. Well, the way that you can do that successfully is if you're one of these cornucopianists, one of these dreamy fantasy sci-fi techno dweebs who frankly spends too much time in front of a a keyboard with a mouse in their hand, you know, and not enough time in the real world. Sorry to be so dismissive like that, but I got to call it like I see it. And that's how I see it. Continuing with Chris Martinson's article here, you have to wonder, is it possible that the team behind Planetary Resources accepts that many crucial natural resources necessary for mobile, green tech, and telecom development are, in truth, neither replicable, nor substitutable, nor sufficiently recoverable here on our fair and blue planet? Question mark. Excellent. Excellent use to, you know, just a twinge of sarcasm there, but it really drives home the point. Sometimes sarcasm, you know, people who use only sarcasm and irony as their primary method of communication, they're obnoxious to be around. You can't stand to be around them for more than a few seconds, few minutes. But sometimes it's an excellent rhetorical technique, and really, it does really work well to prove one's point. And that's an excellent use of sarcasm there. Next section, also in Chris's article, this is called the Abundance Movement. A flowering of new books heralding a new age of abundance have recently appeared, including one from Mr. Diamandis. However, it is worth noting that this cultural theme comes after a decade in which the production rate of many natural resources, from oil to gold to more recently copper, did not speed up, but instead either slowed or stagnated in the face of quickly rising prices. Crude oil production has been trapped below a ceiling since 2005. Global production of gold actually fell every year of the past decade until the last 2 years, but is once again stagnating. Copper production. Now, copper is traders and guys in the pit, especially at the commodities exchange in Chicago, they like to call it Dr. Copper, because it's often a bellwether for the economy. It's often a very leading indicator for where the economy is going to go. So back to Chris here. Copper production managed to rise the past decade. However, ore grades of copper have been declining for a century, as with coal, by the way. A lot of the anthracite coal is gone. It's only the lower grade coals that remain. Continuing. Anyway, copper grades have been declining for a century, and this is why copper has now repriced at much higher levels, closer to $4 per pound. It's interesting. Did any of you guys watch that video I posted of what's going on in Detroit? And those guys were like salvaging, you know, old, abandoned factories. They were like salvaging the metal out of there. And I think the guy said they got $2.50 a pound per copper. But here, Chris is saying on the open market it's priced at $4, so pretty good margin for the middleman there. Continuing, recent data shows also that the rate of growth of global copper production in the last decade slowed significantly and stagnated also in the past 24 months. So that now, I don't know, Chris is really more the man to, you know, I'll defer to him on this. This is really his area of expertise. So I don't know if that, you know, the fact that copper production is stagnated, if that's due to what's called inelastic demand, or if that's simply due to the fact that there's less demand altogether. And I'm not going to speculate. But the tone of what Chris said in this paragraph seems to indicate that it's due more to inelastic demand. That's the way I read it. Okay, continuing, there's an important distinction to make, therefore, between an abundance movement that simply posits we'll have more of everything at cheaper prices in the same style as the past, as opposed to an abundance movement that is tethered to reality and realizes that large changes in consumption, values, and lifestyle will be needed to create the next phase of wealth. Let me see where I am here. 50 minutes. I'll try to get through this without too much commentary so I can do this in about an hour. Authors such as Juliet Shore, who wrote Plenitude, are much more reflective of and respectful of limits, and therefore does not dream of the next phase of mineral mining in outer space. Rather, many, quote, new wealth, unquote, thinkers have gravitated instead to a less is more pathway, emphasis his, in which a lot of our previous consumption and time bankruptcy is finally recognized as waste. Previous consumption and time bankruptcy. I haven't heard that term before, time bankruptcy. Next section, 3 crucial problems with the more is more abundance movement. Peter Thiel recently debated George Gilder at ISI. He's got a link to it. Thiel made a familiar point, which is that the impact of technological progress has become more narrow. I have treated this issue in previous reports and pointed to some of the data on which this thesis relies, including the stagnation of total factor productivity, for example. But Thiel goes on to make a second point, which is that belief in rapid, even accelerating technological progress is surely going to cause tremendous misallocation of capital. And that's the first crucial problem I see with the cornucopian abundance movement. Like a financial system that refuses to accept that tightly coupled structures are risky, and that risk itself grows in tandem with complexity. I'm going to interject here, and also with what I've called, many people have called it, this just-in-time delivery system that we have that gets food from, the farm to the silos, to the processing facility, to the distribution warehouses, to the Costco and the Safeway and the supermarket outlets. That's a just-in-time delivery system. There's computerized inventory of everything that's on the shelves, and they only bring in what they need when they need it. It's a very efficient system, absolutely, don't get me wrong, but it's also very brittle and fragile, and just about anything can take it down. And I've dealt with that in previous videos. Let's see, continuing here. Like a financial system that refuses to accept that tightly coupled structures are risky and that risk itself grows in tandem with complexity, the cornucopian abundance approach simply won't take no for an answer. No, they won't. This means, instead of focusing on smaller solutions with more immediate effects, grandiose solutions like asteroid mining with long timelines are pursued instead. The second crucial problem is a failure to consider the limit outlined by Paul Gilding, which is that present growth rates of energy consumption, for example, imply an economy that just about everyone can agree is simply too large for the planet to handle. You simply cannot keep growing the size of the human-created heat engine up to the level of a star. Okay? Dyson sphere notwithstanding. And I think Peter Diamandis talked about that Dyson sphere idea in his talk. I'm pretty sure he did. This was articulated beautifully by physicist Tom Murphy in his recent and very wide-read post, Exponential Economist Meets Finite Physicists. When problem solvers entirely avoid the subjects of limits, it is both appealing and exciting, but eventually it becomes vaguely pathological. That's very good. I'm going to read that again. When problem solvers entirely avoid the subject of limits, it is both appealing and exciting, but eventually it becomes vaguely pathological. Now, I would highly recommend, if you have not watched the video by who's that guy? Hang on a second here. I'm going to pause while Sorry, I had a little bit of brain lock there. It's hard to hold all these ideas in your head while you're going along. The guy I was thinking of was Dr. Albert Bartlett. Everybody by now should have watched his videos on the limits of exponential growth and his lecture on the exponential function. You don't need advanced mathematics. If you've got a fairly good grasp of four-operator math, you can follow along with what he's talking about here. He'll teach you about the exponential function, and he'll apply it in a wide variety of cases, from everything from population growth, resource depletion, so on and so forth. So I highly recommend that you watch the videos on YouTube by Dr. Albert Bartlett, if you haven't already. Okay, back to Chris's article. Finally, there are a number of pressing issues already on the planet, which range from the risk created when food production is outsourced by water-starved populations to other continents, to large regions of the world, such as Asia, attempting to provide increased electrified transport for billions of people. Now, what does he mean by that, water-starved nations? Well, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be condescending, but crops like wheat and rice require large amounts of water to grow the crops. So, one way you can deal with that, if you're a nation of some means, is you simply import the grains, what they call the softs in the commodities exchanges, the softs and the grains. You import those from other countries. So other countries are using their water to grow the grains. So that lessens the load. It lightens the load on your infrastructure, lightens the demand on your resources, in this case water, to produce those crops. Make sense? That's what Chris is talking about here when he talks about food production being outsourced by water-starved populations. Okay, continuing. Leapfrog adoption of mobile telecom and the rise of social networks will no doubt serve to get these emerging voices out to a world eager to learn and to help with solutions. But celebrating the success of solutions before they've actually arrived, key point, indeed well before they've arrived, is no solution at all. Very well said. Very well said. That's my biggest gripe with people like Peter Diamandis and Peter Joseph, is they talk about Peter Joseph. Again, if you go to the Joe Rogan podcast, listen to that, he says, point blank, there's no such, I don't think there's any overpopulation problem. Why does he say that? Because he's counting on technologies that haven't even arrived yet being implemented to solve the, all these various intersecting curves, population growth curves, resource depletion curves, pollution curves. He's counting on uninvented technologies to, as solutions, as success solutions, as Chris says, before they've even, they've just barely even been conceptualized. Okay. All right, final paragraph. Looks like I will finish this right at about an hour. Final paragraph is called Repricing, or final section is called Repricing the Planet, Real-World Copper as Opposed to Metals in Space. In part 2, the looming dislocation risks posed by resource scarcity, there's a link to that part 2 section in the article, we dive further into the challenges that accompany the acceleration of technology, which relate to deindustrialization and the displacement of human labor with automation. Previously, in the past century, this dynamic gave rise to increased productivity and wealth, but that may no longer be the case. We are not living in a world where any of our critical natural resources are forecasting a radical upswing in supply. Oil and copper, for example, remain decidedly unconcerned about substitution or miracles from space. Put a little sarc tag at the end of that. Importantly, we will take a closer look at the red metal, no, not the red planet, exclamation point, also known as Dr. Copper. Oh, there he goes, he referenced it. What happened to global copper production this past decade as the price rose, question mark, and how crucial will copper become as the world tries to transition away from transport based on liquid BTU, question mark. Okay. Now that part 2, okay, so that's the end of the article, and part 2, it looks like you have to be a subscriber. He says there's a free executive summary. So if he makes that available online, which apparently it's not, it's only available to subscribers, I'll do a part 2 to this and read through that. Anyway, good. Very good article, hit the nail on the head by Chris Martenson, called Mining for Minerals on Asteroids, or Why Cornucopians in Space Deliver a Dangerously Misguided Message. A very good job, very well laid out and structured, very well articulated, yeah, he nailed it. He nailed. So I had some slight disagreements along the way, but nothing, no significant cons. Almost all pros and all agreement for all the various concepts and ideas that he articulated in this article. So, yeah, well done, Chris. Good job. And again, this was posted on Zero Hedge May 9th, 2012, and I'll put a link to it in the description section if you want to go read through it. The comments, yeah, some of them are good. I don't like a lot of these comments on Zero Hedge. I think, you know, I think they're too based on, you know, the survival of the financial system in its current form. They're too based on the idea, they're too reliant on the idea that, you know, throw enough money at a problem and we can solve it. And you see people here poo-pooing the notion of peak oil, peak population. So clearly there's a lot of deniers and a lot of non-believers out there, a lot of skeptics, which is fine. I guess that's what you need to have a debate. All right, I'm going to end here. 61 minutes. Hope this was somewhat interesting. You got something out of it. Yeah, stop here and talk to you later. Thanks for listening. Bye.